Typography is one of the three foundations of good UI design apart from color and layout. It can make or break your UI design. Here are some examples of popular brands that have mastered the art of typography and some of my personal favorites. However, after analyzing these designs, I noticed that there are 5 common traits among good typography. They are typeface, size, weight, spacing and color. So in this video, we are going to cover these 5 parameters and see the difference they can make to your UI design. So before you get started, it's a good habit to know the different components that you will be designing for. This is basically the different text components in your design. For example, in this video, I will be designing a simple news article. So the various text components could be the title, date, author's name, duration, subheadings, quotes, and paragraphs. Therefore, I will first sit down and list all of these components in a notebook or in a Word document. This simple practice will help your design process be a lot smoother. Here is a snapshot of the various components in my news article design. Then, after you have listed your components, it's a good habit to mark the important ones. Some components will be more important than others, so marking them at this stage will help you establish hierarchy as you're designing your UI design. So in our news article example, the titles, subheadings, and quotes are the important elements, and they need to stand out. Therefore, I will mark them in my list that I created before so that I know that these elements need to stand out when I'm designing. Alright, so we are ready to apply the 5 parameters to improve this UI design. First is typeface. Now many people call this font, but the styles of text such as Times New Roman, Helvetica, Arial and so on is actually called typeface, and font is the different attributes of these typefaces such as Arial Bold, Arial Italic and so on. Typically, majority of good UI designs don't use more than 2 or 3 typefaces. In some cases, there is just one. However, for our example, I have picked 2 typefaces, one for headings which is bold and stands out, and the other for body text. If you want to know how to choose typefaces, I have created a video on it which you can check out in the description. So I will apply our header typeface, which is Meriwether Sands, to the main title, subheadings and quote, because as you remember, these are the 3 important elements that we marked in the previous step. Then I will apply the body typeface, which is Roboto, to the other elements such as author name, date, duration and the paragraphs. Therefore, by simply changing the typeface, we can already see a difference in our UI design. The next parameter is size. Now going back to the important elements that we marked in the previous step, we can use size to make these elements stand out even more. So for instance, we can increase the size of our main title, the subheadings and the quote. We can also increase the font size of our body text to make it more legible. The size of the author name, duration and date can be smaller because that is secondary information. After size, we can change font weight, which is basically the thickness of the text. Now there are different font weights such as light, medium, semi-bold, bold and so on, and there's no real right way of doing it. It's just a matter of trial and error and referencing other good UI designs for inspiration. So in our example, let's increase the font weight of the main title and headings to bold and make the quote semi-bold. Font weight can also be applied to smaller elements to make them stand out and not get overpowered by the larger elements. Therefore, we can apply the weight of bold to our author name, duration and date. These small changes are really shaping up our UI design. Moving on, let's look at our 4th parameter, which is spacing. Now spacing is not limited to the white space between our elements. In typography, it also includes letter spacing and line height, which is basically the space between lines in a paragraph. Increasing space between elements lets your content breathe, and it can also set boundaries between elements, thereby creating groups of such elements. For instance, in our example, this section at the top can be considered as one group. Each paragraph heading with body text can be considered another, and the quote can be a section in itself. Therefore, by simply adding space between these sections, we can make them look like distinct groups without the need of adding any sort of line. Now, it's important to note that the letters in text of large sizes tend to have more space between them. Therefore, we can reduce the letter spacing for such text elements so that they look more cleaner. Also, for large paragraphs with a lot of lines, adding more space between these lines will make the content breathe and easier to read. Also, it looks a bit more professional. Finally, let's move on to our last element, which is color. Now, just as it is, our UI design looks good compared to what we started with. So there is no real need to add color to it. Usually, color is used in specific scenarios when you want to call out something. For instance, warnings and other important information. In our example, we can apply a gray color to the author name, duration duration and date, as that is secondary information and it doesn't need to stand out much. Also, to add some finesse to our design, we can also add a tint of grey to our body text to make it look a bit more professional and add balance to the overall UI design. Be sure to use color sparingly and only when it's needed, otherwise it can really affect the legibility and contrast of your UI design. And just like that, we have taken this UI design and improved it step by step by increasing its readability and also make it look more modern and professional. Great UI design is all about making minor changes that add up into larger outcomes. So if you want to learn more about UI design, I have handpicked 2 courses from the Interaction Design Foundation, which is a website that I have personally used. One subscription will give you access to all of their courses, which I truly recommend. You can use my link to get 3 months free. Subscribe for more UX UI tutorials.